My name is Eleanor, and I am 32 years old. Growing up in my family, it didn't take long, not long at all, for me to realize that love and attention were commodities, not freely given. And certainly not distributed equally. From the very moment my younger sister, Clara, drew her first breath, it felt as though the entire household, indeed the very gravitational pull of our home, shifted its orbit to revolve solely around her. She was, and always would be, the golden child, the one blessed with a smile that could melt glaciers, a giggle as sweet as springtime, the perfect, cherished little princess everyone adored without question. And I was just there. An afterthought, a shadow clinging to the edges of their brightly lit world. The sting of that reality was never sharper than on my high school graduation day. I remember standing on the auditorium stage, the weight of the Academic Excellence Award heavy in my hand. The news of my scholarship to the prestigious Northwood University still warm on my lips. I had poured my soul into my studies, hoping, always hoping, that this achievement, this significant milestone, would finally earn me a genuine flicker of pride in their eyes. But when I found Mom and Dad afterwards, their attention was already captured, completely absorbed by Clara. She was chattering excitedly about her leading role in the cheerleading squad's performance at the graduation party. Her voice a bubbly cascade of plans for her dress, her makeup, her grand entrance. My news, my hard-won success. "Oh, Eleanor, that's good," Mom said, her eyes already drifting back to Clara adjusting a stray ribbon. "Well, you were always the smart one, so we expected nothing less." Dad clapped me on the shoulder, a perfunctory gesture. "Make sure you don't overshadow Clara tonight." He chuckled, a supposed joke that landed like a stone in my heart. "She's the star of this show." Later, during the flurry of family photos, I found myself subtly nudged to the periphery, an almost forgotten accessory while Clara, radiant and beaming, occupied the center of every frame, Mom fussing over her hair, Dad beaming with proprietary pride. The unfairness of it all, the casual dismissal of my efforts, felt like a familiar ache, settling deep in my chest. I remember slipping away from the noise and forced smiles, finding refuge in an empty classroom. The official acceptance letter from Northwood, the one detailing the scholarship, trembled in my hand. It was a validation, a ticket to a different future, yet in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of my quiet achievements, a single, silent tear traced a path down my cheek. This was my normal, the constant, subtle reminder that my worth was measured on a different, far less generous scale. This pattern, this dark, painful imbalance, became the undeniable wallpaper of my existence. Whenever Clara achieved something, anything at all, a part in a school play, a compliment on her latest social media post, even a passably good grade, our parents would practically declare a national holiday. There would be effusive praise, celebratory dinners, carefully chosen gifts, and her smiling face would adorn every available surface in the house. A constant, beaming shrine to their favored child. I recall when I was 12, winning first place in the state-sponsored scholarship challenge, a rigorous academic competition. My reward was a distracted, "Good job, kiddo," from Dad, his eyes already scanning the local newspaper for mentions of Clara's upcoming dance recital. The conversation, as always, veered sharply back to her needs, her triumphs, her spotlight. School became my sanctuary, my escape. I buried myself in the cool logic of textbooks and the absorbing complexities of environmental policy projects, desperately seeking the validation, the sense of accomplishment that was so glaringly absent at home. Every certificate of distinction, every academic medal, every hard-earned honor I brought home was met with that same lukewarm acknowledgement before being relegated to a dusty, forgotten box in the attic. Meanwhile, Clara's cheerleading trophies and drama awards gleamed proudly on the main mantelpiece, polished and prominently displayed for all to see. I learned early, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my young heart, that in Mom and Dad's eyes, love was conditional. And I, it seemed, consistently failed to meet those elusive, unspoken conditions. Clara was their dream daughter, vivacious, charmingly social, effortlessly popular. The kind of girl they could proudly parade in front of neighbors and extended family. I was the awkward, introspective shadow in the background, always too quiet, too serious, my nose perpetually in a book, rendering me effectively invisible. Yet, despite the constant, gnawing ache of their indifference, I refused to let my spirit be extinguished. Deep inside, a stubborn fire smoldered, an unyielding, defiant belief that one day, somehow, I would prove my worth. Not for their fleeting applause, not for their conditional affection, but for myself. For the quiet, resilient girl who deserved to be seen. And that day, I vowed, would come. Sooner than any of them expected. The day I packed my bags and left for Northwood University was the first true, intoxicating taste of freedom I had ever known. The air itself seemed different, lighter, charged with possibility. I can still picture myself standing in the doorway of our suburban home, my duffel bags at my feet, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Dad offered a distracted nod, his attention already drifting back to the financial news on the television. Mom, while fussing with a loose thread on my sweater, delivered her parting advice. Now, Eleanor, don't waste all your time buried in those books. A smart girl like you needs to think about settling down soon, finding a nice young man. Her words, meant perhaps as a form of guidance, felt like yet another dismissal of my ambitions. I offered a tight, polite smile and ignored them, the car engine a welcome roar as I pulled away from the curb, leaving behind years of carefully managed expectations and unspoken disappointments. College was a revelation, a complete and utter reawakening. In the hallowed halls of Northwood, within the stimulating environment of classrooms and research groups, I was no longer invisible. My burgeoning passion for environmental policy and sustainable development wasn't considered a weird or a too serious, it was respected, encouraged, and challenged. For the very first time in my life, my dedication and intellectual curiosity opened doors. Rather than being met with polite but firm redirection towards more suitable feminine pursuits, scholarships, coveted internships, research fellowships, I pursued every opportunity with a hunger born of years of being starved of recognition. Grabbing each one with both hands and holding on tight, while many of my peers spent their weekends navigating the social currents of parties and campus events, I found my solace and my purpose in the quiet hum of the university libraries and the collaborative energy of late-night study sessions in the environmental sciences lab. My relentless hard work, the countless hours poured into research papers and policy analysis, ultimately paid off. I graduated with honors, near the top of my class, securing a coveted analyst position at Green Tech Solutions, a prestigious environmental consulting firm, even before the ink was dry on my master's degree. The starting salary wasn't astronomical, not by Wall Street standards, but it was more than enough. Enough to finally begin building the life I had always yearned for, a life constructed on my own terms, a life where I wouldn't have to shrink myself, dim my own light, to fit into the cramped confines of someone else's expectations. I lived with a quiet frugality, a discipline honed by years of knowing I could only truly rely on myself. Every bonus, every incremental raise, every extra dollar earned from my weekend side hustle doing online environmental impact translations was carefully saved, meticulously allocated. I didn't splurge on designer clothes that would be out of style in a season, or a flashy car I didn't need, or luxurious vacations that felt like an indulgence I hadn't yet earned. My focus was singular, unwavering, independence. Financial independence, emotional independence, and ultimately, the tangible symbol of it all, a home of my own. At the age of 30, after years of quiet sacrifices, disciplined saving, and relentless focus, I finally achieved it. I bought a charming, renovated 2-bedroom townhouse for $480,000 in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood just outside the city. It wasn't a sprawling mansion, not by any means, but it was perfect for me. A modern, updated kitchen gleaming with potential, a cozy living room bathed in afternoon light, and a small, promising patch of a backyard where I envisioned creating a herb garden and reading books on sunny afternoons. Every wall, every floorboard, every carefully chosen paint color in that house represented a piece of me, my struggles, my perseverance, my hard-won achievements, my quiet, deeply held dreams. It was mine. Wholly and unequivocally mine. When I finally told Mom and Dad about my purchase, a small, perhaps foolishly optimistic part of me still harbored a faint hope for a flicker of genuine pride, a moment of shared joy. But, true to form, their reaction was underwhelming, almost dismissive. Mom barely registered the news, her mind already buzzing with the latest details of Clara's life. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, before immediately pivoting. "Speaking of big news, Clara just got engaged to Julian. Isn't that wonderful? Such a lovely young man, and his family is very well established." She then launched into a detailed account of Julian's proposal and the stunning diamond ring, her voice alight with an excitement she rarely, if ever, showed for my accomplishments. Dad, ever the pragmatist, or perhaps just indifferent, offered a half-hearted smile and a characteristic, subtly undermining comment. "A townhouse, huh? That's a lot of space for just one person, Eleanor. Sure you can handle the mortgage on an analyst's salary?" His words, though perhaps not intended to be cruel, still carried a familiar sting, a subtle questioning of my capabilities, my judgment. I showed them photos on my phone, the bright kitchen, the spacious living area, the little garden I was so excited about. They glanced politely, but their eyes kept straying to the picture of Clara's engagement ring that Mom had proudly displayed on her own phone. "Julian's parents are helping them with a down payment on a lovely new apartment in the city," Mom added, her tone implying a certain superiority in Clara's more traditional path. "It's just easier for a girl that way, isn't it?" Their lukewarm reception, the immediate overshadowing of my milestone with Clara's news, was a familiar ache, but this time, it didn't have the power to completely dim my happiness. For once, I wasn't desperately seeking their approval. I had built this life for myself, brick by painstaking brick. And nothing, I thought with a surge of quiet determination, absolutely nothing, could take that away from me. I was profoundly, devastatingly wrong. Clara's wedding had been the central topic of conversation in our family for months, a whirlwind of planning and mounting excitement. At least for Mom and Dad. Mom had thrown herself into the role of chief event planner with an almost manic energy, obsessing over every minute detail. The exact shade of ivory for the floral arrangements from Sweet Harmony cakes, the intricate catering menu, the endless fittings for Clara's designer gown. Dad stood proudly at her side, a beaming patriarch ready to present their perfect, cherished daughter to the world. His wallet considerably lighter but his pride visibly inflated. I attended, of course. That was expected. Despite the years of feeling like an outsider, a peripheral character in my own family's narrative, I still clung to some vestige of belief in showing up for these significant family milestones, even if I often felt more like a distant acquaintance than a beloved sister or daughter. The wedding venue, the Willow Creek Manor, was undeniably beautiful, an elegant, historic building decked out in opulent swathes of ivory and gold. Thousands of tiny fairy lights twinkled like captured stars from the high, vaulted ceilings, and the soft, romantic strains of a string quartet drifted from hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of enchantment. The air buzzed with the excited chatter and laughter of the arriving guests, a sea of pastel dresses and sharp suits, everyone mingling, sipping champagne, and anticipating the ceremony. Everyone, it seemed, was utterly wrapped up in the magic and romance of the evening. As I stood near the ornate refreshment table, nursing a glass of sparkling water and observing the elaborate celebrations unfold, I couldn't help but feel a familiar, bittersweet ache settle in my chest. There was no denying it. This day, this entire extravagant affair, was unequivocally about Clara. It was about her fairy tale beginning, about the flawless, picture-perfect image Mom and Dad had so meticulously cultivated for her, and by extension, for themselves. Julian, Clara's fiancé, seemed genuinely kind, if a little overwhelmed by the scale of it all. He possessed a shy, unassuming smile and gentle, courteous manners, treating everyone he interacted with, including me, with a quiet respect. In another life, under different circumstances, I might have even found myself liking him as a brother-in-law. I had chosen Clara's gift with care, a vintage silver locket, delicately engraved with a quote about new journeys and enduring love. It wasn't ostentatious or wildly expensive, but it was personal, a quiet offering from a part of my heart I rarely showed. Naturally, no one made a particular fuss over it. It was just me, after all, Eleanor, the sensible, bookish older sister. The ceremony itself hadn't officially begun. Guests were still filtering in, their voices a low hum of pleasantries and anticipation. Pausing to admire the floral displays or to select an appetizer from the circulating trays. Clara, a vision in her white satin gown that trailed elegantly behind her, flitted around the main hall. Her face glowing with an almost ethereal happiness, basking in the admiring glances. I, as usual, gravitated towards the fringes of the activity, offering a polite smile when required, content to blend into the background. A familiar and comfortable role. But beneath the veneer of celebration, an almost imperceptible unease pricked at my senses. There was a certain tightness in the air, a subtle tension coiling beneath the surface, and a strange, almost predatory glint in Mom's eyes whenever her gaze flickered in my direction. I couldn't have known it then, couldn't have possibly predicted the sharp, ugly turn the evening was about to take. But the celebration that was meant to be the pinnacle of Clara's happiness, and by extension, Mom and Dad's parental pride, would soon twist into something else entirely, something shocking, something brutal, something utterly unforgettable. A few days before the wedding, Mom had called me, her voice a little too bright, a little too casual. "Eleanor, dear," she'd begun, "Dad and I were just thinking about your lovely new townhouse." My stomach had tightened. It's so spacious, and since Clara and Julian will be looking for a place after their honeymoon, well, it would be such a help if they could stay with you for a little while. Just until they get settled. Mom, I had started, trying to find a polite way to refuse. "It's not really set up for more than one person right now." "Oh, nonsense, it's huge for just you," she'd countered quickly. "Just think about it, dear. It would mean so much to Clara." I had managed to deflect the request then, citing work commitments and the need for my own space, but the seed of their intention had been planted. Now, at the Willow Creek Manor, just moments before Clara was due to walk down the aisle, the pressure resurfaced, far more intensely. I was standing in a relatively quiet alcove near the grand staircase, trying to compose myself, when Mom waved me over with an overly sweet, almost saccharine smile that never failed to set my teeth on edge. Dad stood beside her, his hands clasped formally behind his back, his expression unreadable but tinged with an unusual solemnity. "Eleanor, darling, we need a quick word in private before everything starts," Mom said. Her tone laced with that familiar sugary sharpness that always made my stomach clench in apprehension. I followed them, a sense of dread already beginning to coil within me, a few steps away from the main throng of guests, into a small, opulent anteroom designated as a waiting area for the bridal party. The joyful music from the main hall faded to a distant, muffled hum. Julian was thankfully elsewhere, probably with his groomsmen, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. Mom leaned in first, her voice low but imbued with a steely urgency, her eyes darting towards the closed door as if to ensure privacy. "This is such an incredibly special day for Clara, for all of us. Everything has been absolutely perfect so far, hasn't it?" She didn't wait for an answer. "We were so pleased you came around to the idea of helping out." I frowned. "Helping out?" Dad cleared his throat, a sound that always signaled an impending pronouncement. He exchanged a loaded glance with Mom before fixing his gaze on me. "Your mother and I have been discussing it, Eleanor. And we feel it's only right. For the future of this new family, for Clara and Julian's happiness. And frankly, for appearances." I straightened, the unease blossoming into genuine alarm. "Appearances? That beautiful townhouse of yours," Mom said, her eyes shining not with maternal affection, but with a cold, unmistakable calculation. "You're single, Eleanor. You're busy with your career at GTS. You don't really need all that space, do you?" And as we discussed, Dad interjected, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Clara and Julian will need a place to live when they return from their honeymoon. Somewhere respectable. So, it's settled," Mom declared, beaming as if bestowing a great favor. "They can move into your townhouse. It will be their home." I blinked, the audacity of their words landing like physical blows, their true meaning slow to penetrate the shock. This wasn't a request to stay for a little while anymore. This was a demand. They weren't asking, they were telling me. Dad stepped forward, attempting a paternal, benevolent smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We think it would be the most wonderful, most generous wedding gift. A true testament to family loyalty. You give your house to Clara and Julian. For a stunned moment, the world around me went utterly silent. The distant clink of glasses, the faint murmur of laughter from the guests outside it all blurred into an indistinct, roaring white noise. You can't be serious, I finally managed to choke out, my voice a tight, incredulous whisper. Of course, we're serious, Eleanor, Mom said, her smile tightening, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. As if I were being deliberately obtuse. It's your duty as her older sister. Family helps family. And this will ensure Clara starts her married life in a manner befitting her new status. And frankly, our family's reputation. Julian's parents will be so impressed by your generosity, Dad added, as if that were the ultimate justification. My hands, hidden in the folds of my dress, curled into tight, trembling fists at my sides. A torrent of images flashed through my mind, the years of meticulous saving. Of lonely nights working overtime on freelance translation projects to supplement my income, of denying myself small pleasures, vacations. Even simple comforts, all to scrape together the down payment for that house. My sanctuary, my hard-won achievement. A symbol of my independence, of everything I had fought for. I shook my head, slowly at first, then with more conviction, a wave of righteous anger, hot and fierce, surging through me, dispelling the shock. No, I said, my voice surprisingly firm, cutting through the suffocating atmosphere of the room. Absolutely not. I am not giving my house to Clara, or to anyone else. Mom's carefully constructed smile instantly vanished. Her eyes, moments before falsely warm, now flashed with something dark and venomous, disappointment rapidly morphing into a cold, terrifying fury. Dad's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching visibly in his cheek. The air in the small room crackled with sudden, explosive tension. Before I could take a defensive step back, before I could even fully brace myself for the inevitable storm of their disapproval, Dad moved. And in that single, horrifying instant, everything changed. Dad's hand moved with a speed that was utterly shocking. At first, I didn't even fully register what he was doing, my mind struggling to process the sudden shift from verbal coercion to physical threat. In one swift, furious motion, he reached out and grabbed a heavy, unopened champagne bottle from a nearby table, one of several that had been ornately decorated with ribbons and silk flowers. Clearly intended as a wedding gift for Clara, perhaps from Sweet Harmony Cakes or another vendor. It was a magnum, thick glass, substantial. Without a single word, without a flicker of hesitation or a shred of parental restraint, he swung it. Not at the wall, not at a piece of furniture, but at me. The heavy base of the bottle connected with my left shoulder with a sickening, dull thud. A white-hot flash of pure, unadulterated pain exploded through me, radiating down my arm and up into my neck. I cried out, stumbling backward from the force of the blow, my hand instinctively flying to my shoulder, a gasp tearing from my throat. The room tilted, and I crumpled to the polished wooden floor, the impact jarring through my entire body. The ornate champagne bottle clattered loudly as it fell from Dad's grip, rolling a short distance before coming to rest against a velvet-upholstered chair. Through the roaring in my ears and the blinding pain, I could hear a sharp intake of breath from Mom. But it wasn't a gasp of concern for me. I could see Mom rushing towards me, not with outstretched hands of comfort, but with a snarl contorting her usually carefully composed features. You selfish, ungrateful brat, she spat, her voice a venomous hiss, sharp enough to cut deeper than any physical blow. After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed, you dare to humiliate us like this? Today, of all days? Her words were a torrent of accusations, blaming me for Dad's violence, for her own thwarted plans. I staggered, trying to push myself up, my vision blurring, my shoulder screaming in protest. The door to the anteroom burst open. Julian stood there, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, his eyes darting from my crumpled form on the floor to Dad, who stood panting, his face flushed with rage, and then to Mom, her features twisted in fury. Behind him, I could see the horrified faces of a few wedding guests who had been drawn by the commotion, their festive smiles frozen in expressions of stunned disbelief. Someone gasped. A woman screamed, a short, sharp sound. In an instant, the carefully constructed facade of the perfect wedding, the perfect family, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Around me, in the doorway, guests were already pulling out their phones. I saw the telltale red light of recording on more than one device. Some were documenting the ugly scene, others just watched in wide-eyed, silent shock. And yet, through it all, I saw Clara appear behind Julian, her white gown a stark contrast to the ugliness unfolding. Her mouth was parted in silent, horrified disbelief, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. Julian, to his credit, was already moving, pushing past the onlookers, his face grim as he rushed towards me. Before he could reach me, however, a man's voice rang out from the crowd, loud, firm, and commanding. "I'm calling the police," shouted a guest, a man I vaguely recognized from earlier, perhaps a colleague of Julian's father. His name, I'd later learn, was Eric. He already had his phone to his ear, speaking quickly and urgently. Mom, oblivious or uncaring, lunged towards me again, her words still a torrent of blame and fury, but Julian stepped between us just in time. Shielding me with his own body, his arm protectively outstretched. "Stay away from her, Beatrice," he growled, his usual gentle, courteous tone replaced with something steely, fierce, and utterly resolute. "Both of you." The pain in my shoulder throbbed with every beat of my heart, a sickening ache that was as much emotional as it was physical. The fairy tale wedding at the Willow Creek Manor had irrevocably unraveled into a horrifying, public nightmare. Within what felt like mere minutes, though it was probably longer, the piercing wail of sirens sliced through the previously festive air. Growing rapidly closer, red and blue lights flashed erratically against the elegant, leaded glass windows of the venue, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the stunned faces of the remaining guests. Paramedics from Fairmont General Hospital were the first to rush in, their movements swift and professional, their voices calm amidst the surrounding chaos. They were gentle as they knelt beside me, their hands surprisingly steady as they began to assess my injuries, carefully examining my shoulder. Asking questions I struggled to answer through the fog of pain and shock. One of them pressed a cool compress to my shoulder, the relief momentary but welcome. Behind me, as they helped me slowly to my feet, I heard the distinct, sharp click of handcuffs. "Victor Reynolds," a police officer announced, his voice stern and unwavering, "You are under arrest for assault." Another officer, a woman with a no-nonsense expression, turned to Mom, who was still attempting to argue, her voice rising in a shrill tirade of denial and indignation. "You too, ma'am," the officer said coldly, firmly taking Mom's arm and guiding her hands behind her back. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding this incident." The world blurred again, a dizzying kaleidoscope of flashing lights, concerned faces, and official-sounding voices. As the paramedics carefully guided me towards the waiting ambulance, I wasn't sure if it was the throbbing pain in my shoulder, the lingering shock, or just the crushing weight of years of heartbreak finally taking its toll, but the only thing I knew for certain in that moment was this: there was no going back. The carefully constructed dam of my composure had finally broken, and the consequences were flooding in, unstoppable and irreversible. The scene outside the Willow Creek Manor was a chaotic tableau of flashing emergency lights, murmuring clusters of onlookers, and the hurried, purposeful footsteps of police officers and paramedics. As the paramedics gently eased me onto a stretcher in the back of the ambulance, I could hear fragmented snippets of conversations swirling around me. A chorus of disbelief and outrage. "Did you see that? He hit her. With a champagne bottle. Can you believe it? I got the whole thing on video. It's crystal clear. Unbelievable. At his own daughter's wedding. What kind of animal does that?" The paramedics worked swiftly and efficiently, immobilizing my shoulder, checking my vital signs, and speaking to me in calm, reassuring tones, ensuring I remained conscious and coherent. I could see Eric, the guest who had called 911, standing nearby, still speaking to a police officer, showing him the footage he had captured on his phone. His face was grim, his gestures emphatic. Another guest, a woman I barely knew, perhaps one of Clara's friends, came forward hesitantly, holding up her own phone, its screen illuminated. "Officer, I recorded it too, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You can have my copy if it helps. Within minutes, it seemed, several other guests had volunteered their own video recordings. Their faces tight with a mixture of anger at what they had witnessed and disgust at my parents' behavior. The officers gathered the digital evidence methodically, taking brief initial statements, ensuring that every piece of this ugly, unfolding story was documented. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad sat on the curb a short distance away, both in handcuffs, both visibly seething. Mom continued to hurl insults and accusations under her breath, her face a mask of righteous indignation, while Dad stared stonily at the ground. His jaw set in a grim, unyielding silence, offering no apology, no explanation. Julian hovered nearby, his face pale and drawn, refusing to leave my side until the ambulance doors were about to close. His hands were clenched and unclenched at his sides, the tension radiating off him like a palpable heat. This was supposed to be a wedding, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice raw with disbelief and a dawning horror. A celebration. How could they turn it into this? One of the police officers, a sergeant with kind eyes, approached me gently before the paramedics closed the ambulance doors. Ms. Reynolds, he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. We'll need a full statement from you once you're feeling up to it, probably at Fairmont General Hospital. For now, based on what we've seen and the multiple eyewitness accounts, we're treating this as a serious assault. I nodded weakly, the throbbing pain in my shoulder intensifying with every beat of my heart. A relentless reminder of the violence I had just endured. As they carefully loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a fleeting, heartbreaking glimpse of Clara. She was standing at the grand entrance of the Willow Creek Manor, a solitary figure in her once pristine wedding gown, which now seemed to mock the ruined occasion. Her face was crumpled in despair, tears streaming down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking. Julian's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, stood a little way off to her side, their arms crossed, their faces dark and unreadable, radiating an icy fury. I could see it even from that distance, the cracks forming, the alliances shifting, the inevitable, devastating consequences beginning to ripple outwards. The moment the ambulance doors closed behind me, sealing me away from the immediate chaos, a chilling realization washed over me. This wasn't just the end of a wedding. It was the beginning of a long, painful, and profoundly necessary reckoning. As the ambulance sped away, its siren a mournful cry in the night, carrying me towards the sterile sanctuary of Fairmont General Hospital. The devastation I left behind at the Willow Creek Manor continued to unfold with brutal, unceremonious efficiency. Inside the once joyous venue, the atmosphere had curdled beyond any hope of repair. The champagne flutes stood untouched, the magnificent wedding cake from Sweet Harmony Cakes remained uncut, a silent, sugary monument to a celebration that would never be. Guests murmured in shocked, hushed clusters, some gathering their belongings with a quiet, awkward haste. Others simply shaking their heads in stunned disbelief, their earlier festive mood entirely extinguished. No one was dancing. No one was celebrating. The string quartet had long since packed up their instruments and departed. Julian's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence, pillars of their community, stood ramrod straight before a distraught Clara and her few remaining bewildered family members. Their faces, usually so genial, were now hard, etched with a mixture of profound disappointment and cold, unyielding outrage. This is utterly unforgivable, Mr. Lawrence finally said, his voice, though quiet, echoing with an undeniable finality across the now mostly silent, cavernous room. We will not, under any circumstances, allow our son, or our family, to be tied to one that condones, or worse, perpetrates such appalling violence and cruelty. Mrs. Lawrence, a woman known for her composure, nodded sharply in agreement, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line, her eyes, when they briefly met Clara's, flashing with a mixture of pity and revulsion. We trusted you, Clara, she said, her voice trembling with a carefully contained anger that was almost more frightening than an outright outburst. We welcomed this engagement, celebrated your love for Julian, because we believed in him, and we wanted to believe in you. But after what we have witnessed here tonight, after seeing what your parents are capable of, and your inability to even acknowledge the horror of it. she faltered, then continued, her voice hardening. There can be no marriage. Not now. Not ever. Clara, still a tragic figure in her elaborate wedding gown, gasped audibly, fresh tears welling in her eyes. Her mascara tracing dark rivulets down her pale cheeks. Please, she whispered, her hand reaching out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Please, Mrs. Lawrence, don't say that. It was a misunderstanding. But Mrs. Lawrence visibly recoiled, stepping back as if burned by the very suggestion. A misunderstanding, Clara? Mr. Lawrence interjected, his tone incredulous and laced with ice. Your father brutally attacked your sister with a weapon. Your mother screamed vile abuse at her. We all saw it. Dozens of people saw it. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a horrifying display of barbarity. This is not just about what happened today, as appalling as it was, he continued, his gaze unwavering, sweeping over the remaining few members of Clara's family with undisguised contempt. This is about the kind of people you surround yourself with. The kind of values your family espouses. The kind of environment you clearly come from. We will not expose our son, or any future grandchildren, to this poison. With that devastating pronouncement, Julian's parents turned, with a dignity that only highlighted the Reynolds' disgrace, and walked decisively away. Leaving Clara standing alone, utterly broken, humiliated, and abandoned amidst the ruins of her once perfect wedding day. Julian, who had returned to the hall after seeing me safely into the ambulance, stood off to one side, his face ashen. Watching the entire heart-wrenching exchange unfold, he didn't argue with his parents. He didn't rush to defend Clara. His eyes, when they finally, briefly, met hers across the rapidly emptying room, were filled not with the love and adoration of a groom, but with a profound, soul-deep disappointment and a dawning, unmistakable regret. Slowly, one by one, the remaining guests began to trickle out, murmuring awkward, insincere condolences or, more often, avoiding eye contact with Clara altogether as they made their escape. In a matter of mere minutes, the wedding that had been meticulously planned for months, the wedding that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Clara's young life, dissolved into nothing more than a pile of expensive, bitter ashes. Clara, her shoulders finally slumping in defeat, sank into a nearby gilded chair, her magnificent white dress pooling around her like a wilted, discarded flower. Dad and Mom, now under police custody and facing serious charges, could do nothing to intervene, nothing to salvage the situation. Shackled by the brutal consequences of their own arrogance and uncontrollable rage, the wedding was officially, completely, and devastatingly called off. And it all traced back to one simple, undeniable truth: their relentless cruelty, their carefully cultivated image of a perfect family, had finally, spectacularly, destroyed everything they held dear. The hospital room at Fairmont General Hospital was small, sterile, but blessedly quiet, a stark, welcome contrast to the cacophony of recriminations and shattered dreams I had left behind at the Willow Creek Manor. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling buzzed with a soft, monotonous hum as nurses moved around with quiet efficiency, checking my vitals, cleaning and dressing the deep, painful bruise on my shoulder, and asking gentle questions about my pain levels. I lay still, my body sore and aching, but it was my heart that felt heavier than ever before. Burdened by a grief so profound it seemed to have taken up permanent residence within me. The doctors, after a thorough examination and x-rays, informed me that I had severe bruising and soft tissue damage to my shoulder, but miraculously, no fractures. A small miracle, one of them had said, considering the force of the blow from a heavy champagne bottle. I was lucky, they'd pronounced. It certainly didn't feel like luck. It felt like the culmination of a lifetime of being on the receiving end of their casual cruelty, only this time, it had escalated to brutal physical violence. As I rested, drifting in and out of a shallow, uneasy sleep, the door to my private room creaked open almost silently. Julian stepped inside, his usually cheerful face etched with lines of worry and fatigue. In his hands, he carried a small, unpretentious bouquet of fresh daisies. Their sunny yellow centers a small beacon of warmth in the otherwise sterile environment. Simple, genuine. "Hey," he said softly, his voice a little hoarse as he approached my bedside. I managed a small, weak smile. The effort felt monumental. "You didn't have to come, Julian. You have, or had, other things to deal with." "I wanted to," he replied firmly, his gaze unwavering and full of a surprising tenderness. "I had to." Are you okay?" He pulled up the uncomfortable plastic visitor's chair and sat beside me, his hands clasped tightly together in his lap, his knuckles white. For a long, heavy moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything that had happened, the sheer, unadulterated ugliness of it, hung palpably in the air between us. "I am so incredibly, profoundly sorry for what they did to you, Eleanor," Julian finally said, his voice breaking slightly on my name, a raw emotion roughening its edges. "You didn't deserve any of this. None of it. Not tonight, not ever." Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at the corners of my eyes, blurring the concerned lines on his face. I blinked them away fiercely. I didn't want to cry anymore, not for them, not because of them. I had shed enough tears over their indifference and cruelty to last a lifetime. Julian took a deep, steadying breath, as if steeling himself. "I know a really good lawyer," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more practical, more focused. "Actually, a whole team. Miller and Finch Legal Group. One of the partners, Scott Miller, he's a close family friend, and he's one of the best." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "If you're willing, Eleanor, and I mean truly willing, I think you should press charges. Serious charges. Not just for what Victor did tonight with that bottle, but for everything. For the years of them treating you like you didn't matter." For a moment, I hesitated, the ingrained instinct to protect the family, however dysfunctional, warring with the fresh, raw wound of their latest betrayal. Taking legal action against my own parents, Dad and Mom, the very thought twisted something painful deep inside me. It felt like a monumental, unnatural step. But then, I remembered Mom's furious, contorted face spitting those vile accusations, Dad's brutal, unhesitating swing of that champagne bottle. The searing pain, and overlaying it all, the countless, cumulative instances of being dismissed, devalued, and treated as if I were fundamentally less than Clara, less than enough. And something inside me, something that had been bruised and battered but never entirely broken, hardened into a core of cold, unyielding resolve. "I want to do it," I said, my voice raspy but surprisingly strong, imbued with a certainty that surprised even myself. "I have to. For myself." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Julian's lips, a fleeting expression of what looked like pride. "Good," he said softly, but with immense conviction. "That's good, Eleanor. You deserve justice. You deserve so much better than what they've given you." He reached out then, his hand gently, tentatively, covering mine where it lay on the crisp hospital sheet. His touch was warm, steady, offering a silent, profound support that resonated deep within me. For the first time in what felt like a very long time, I didn't feel quite so utterly, devastatingly alone. By the end of that tumultuous week, once the doctors at Fairmont General Hospital were satisfied with my progress and cleared me for discharge, my shoulder still painfully stiff and extensively bruised. But on the mend, Julian was there. He had been a constant, quiet presence, visiting every day, bringing books and take-out coffee, and simply sitting with me when I didn't feel like talking. He helped me with the discharge paperwork, his quiet competence a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. Together, we drove straight from the hospital to the imposing downtown offices of Miller and Finch Legal Group, ready to take the first definitive step towards reclaiming not just my house, but my life, my dignity. Scott Miller's office was unexpectedly warm and welcoming, a sanctuary of calm amidst the city's bustle. Dark, polished wooden shelves lined with impressive legal tomes and framed certificates of achievement exuded an air of quiet authority and success. Yet, despite the comforting, professional decor, my hands trembled almost imperceptibly as I sat across the large mahogany desk from Scott, preparing to sign the formidable stack of legal paperwork he had meticulously prepared. "This won't be an easy path, Eleanor," Scott warned gently, his gaze direct but compassionate as he slid the documents across the desk towards me. "Family cases, especially those involving allegations like these, can be emotionally grueling. But I want to assure you, with the evidence we have, the multiple video recordings from the wedding, the eyewitness statements from other guests, your own detailed account, and the medical reports, you have a very, very strong case." Julian sat beside me, a silent pillar of strength, his presence steady and profoundly reassuring. I glanced at the thick, meticulously organized file on Scott's desk. It was already bulging. Inside, as Scott had outlined, were sworn affidavits from several wedding guests who had witnessed the assault. Detailed medical reports from Fairmont General Hospital detailing the extent of my injuries, including the concussion and shoulder trauma. And most crucially, multiple, crystal-clear video recordings of Dad's violent attack and Mom's abusive tirade. Every brutal, humiliating moment was captured in cold, undeniable, digital reality. There were also copies of emails and even a few carefully preserved diary entries from my teenage years, which I had reluctantly shared, detailing earlier instances of Mom and Dad's unfair treatment and emotional manipulation, a pattern of behavior that Scott believed would be crucial in establishing a history of abuse. Clara's own social media, ironically, provided further evidence of the blatant favoritism, with countless posts showcasing lavish gifts and trips from Mom and Dad, things I had never once been offered. "I'm ready," I said, my voice calm but firm, resonating with a newfound determination that surprised even myself. "I want to do this. I need to do this." Scott nodded, a look of professional approval in his eyes. "Excellent. We'll be filing charges for felony assault against your father, Victor, and we're also exploring charges of aiding and abetting, or at least verbal assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress, against your mother, Beatrice, given her role in the preceding confrontation and her behavior during and after the assault. Furthermore," he continued, his tone serious, "we will be pursuing a civil case for damages. This will cover your medical expenses, legal fees, pain and suffering, and significant emotional distress caused by their actions, both recent and historical. Their past pattern of behavior, their clear favoritism towards your sister, Clara, and their attempts to coerce you regarding your property will all strengthen your case for emotional abuse and undue influence." Hearing it all laid out so formally, so starkly, made my stomach twist with a complicated knot of apprehension and, strangely, a nascent sense of empowerment. This was real. This was happening. And it fueled something deep inside me, a quiet, unshakable resolve to see this through to the end. Within days, the wheels of justice, often slow, began to turn with surprising speed. The case moved forward. Court dates were scheduled. Subpoenas were meticulously prepared and issued. Witnesses, including Eric and several other guests from the wedding, were contacted and agreed to testify. The digital evidence was compiled and submitted. When the trial finally began, several weeks later, the courtroom was unexpectedly packed. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years, distant relatives I barely knew, even a few local reporters. Alerted to the salacious nature of the case, a daughter pressing serious criminal charges against her own prominent parents, had shown up, eager for the drama. Dad and Mom sat stiffly at the defendant's table, their faces pale and drawn, etched with a mixture of disbelief and barely suppressed rage. They looked older, diminished, stripped of their usual confident bluster. I took the stand, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, but my voice, when I began to speak, was steady. Supported by Scott's calm, methodical questioning, I told my story, the pervasive childhood neglect, the blatant, soul-crushing favoritism shown towards Clara, the relentless years of emotional abuse and manipulation, and finally, the horrifying, violent attack during what was supposed to be Clara's joyous wedding ceremony. I recounted Dad's words, Mom's demands, the feel of the champagne bottle striking my shoulder, the searing pain, the humiliation. Then, Scott presented the video evidence to the jury. The hushed courtroom watched in stunned silence as the footage, compiled from multiple angles, played out on the large screens. It showed everything with damning clarity, Dad's face contorted in rage as he grabbed the heavy, decorated champagne bottle, the brutal, shocking swing, my stumble and cry of pain, the raw, ugly sound of the impact, Mom's subsequent screaming insults and accusations. Her face a mask of fury, Julian rushing to my aid, guests pulling out their phones, their faces reflecting horror and disbelief, Eric making the urgent call to the police. Every single, damning second was undeniable, irrefutable. A collective gasp went through the courtroom when the footage ended. Witness after witness, Eric, the woman who had offered her video. Other guests who had been present in or near the anteroom, took the stand and bravely, unequivocally confirmed what the videos so starkly showed. Some even testified to observing the lifelong pattern of favoritism and Mom and Dad's often dismissive and sometimes cruel treatment of me over the years, painting a consistent picture of their characters. Dad's expensive lawyer, a slick, confident man, tried desperately to argue that it was a momentary, regrettable lapse in judgment, a terrible accident. He claimed that tensions had been understandably high on such an emotional day, that Dad had been provoked by my unreasonable refusal to help my sister, that it was all a tragic misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He attempted to paint me as difficult, ungrateful, and overly sensitive. But the evidence, particularly the multiple video angles showing the deliberation and force of the attack, was simply too strong, too damning. The truth, in this instance, was brutally clear and could not be spun. The jury didn't deliberate for long. Less than 2 hours. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with hushed speculation during their absence, fell into a heavy, expectant silence as the jury filed back in, their expressions grim, somber, and certain. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Julian, who had been a steadfast presence throughout the entire grueling trial, reached over, his hand lightly, reassuringly squeezing mine. His eyes met mine, offering a silent message: whatever happens, Eleanor, you are not alone in this. You did the right thing. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a kind but serious face, stood, clutching a piece of paper, and cleared her throat. The small sound amplified in the profound stillness. On the charge of felony assault against the defendant, Victor Reynolds, she announced, her voice clear and steady, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A sharp, collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. On the charge of aiding and abetting and intentional infliction of emotional distress against the defendant, Beatrice Reynolds, she continued, we find the defendant guilty. The words echoed through the silent courtroom, slicing through the thick, suffocating tension like a razor-sharp blade. Dad's shoulders, which had been unnaturally rigid, visibly sagged. His face, already pale, seemed to crumple, aging him a decade in that single, devastating moment. Mom gasped sharply, a strangled, incredulous sound, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. She clutched the edge of the defendant's table as if for physical support. For once, for the very first time in their lives, they couldn't talk their way out of the consequences. They couldn't spin their elaborate lies, couldn't manipulate sympathy with crocodile tears or feigned remorse. They couldn't bully or intimidate their way to absolution. Justice, impartial and unyielding, was happening, right here, right now, in this very courtroom. Judge Hamilton, a stern, experienced woman with sharp, intelligent eyes behind her sensible glasses and an even sharper, no-nonsense voice, wasted no time in proceeding to sentencing. She had clearly reviewed all the evidence and the pre-sentencing reports thoroughly. In light of the overwhelming and frankly disturbing evidence presented in this case, she said, her voice cold, steady, and devoid of any sympathy for the defendants, and considering the significant and lasting physical and emotional damage inflicted upon the plaintiff, Ms. Eleanor Reynolds, by those who should have been her protectors, I hereby sentence the defendant, Victor Reynolds, to a term of 8 years in state prison. He will not be eligible for parole before serving a minimum of 6 years. A stunned gasp rippled through the spectators. 8 years. It was a significant sentence. As for the defendant, Beatrice Reynolds, the judge continued, her gaze fixing on Mom with undisguised disapproval. for her role in instigating the confrontation, her verbal abuse, and the clear pattern of emotional cruelty demonstrated. She is sentenced to 5 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and 500 hours of community service. Furthermore, Judge Hamilton's voice rose slightly, emphasizing the next point. Both defendants are ordered to pay full restitution to Ms. Eleanor Reynolds for all her medical expenses, her legal fees, and a further sum of $250,000 in damages for emotional distress and suffering. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. It was a validation, a public acknowledgement of the pain and injustice I had endured for so long. Dad and Mom were immediately approached by the court bailiffs. The metallic click of handcuffs being secured around their wrists was a stark, final sound in the otherwise silent courtroom. Their expressions were a twisted, ugly melange of shock, disbelief, and impotent fury as they were led away. Their impeccably dressed forms now looking rumpled and defeated. Dad turned briefly, his eyes, filled with a dawning despair, desperately searching mine, perhaps for a flicker of forgiveness. A hint of regret on my part. He found none. Only a quiet, resolute strength. I watched them disappear through the heavy side doors of the courtroom, swallowed by the impartial machinery of the justice system they had so arrogantly, so foolishly, believed would never, could never, touch them. As Judge Hamilton's gavel slammed down with a sharp, decisive crack, signaling the official end of the hearing, a huge, shuddering breath I hadn't even realized I was holding escaped my chest in a ragged whoosh. It was over. Truly, finally over. The long, lonely years of neglect, the constant, casual cruelty, the soul-destroying favoritism, the ultimate betrayal, they had all led to this moment, this difficult but necessary reckoning. And for the very first time in my entire life, I wasn't just surviving. I was free. Utterly, breathtakingly free. The bright, clear afternoon sun kissed my face with an unexpected warmth as I stepped out of the cool, dim interior of the county courthouse. The gentle breeze carrying with it a profound sense of closure I had never known before, a lightness that felt entirely new. In one hand, I clutched the final sheaf of legal paperwork from Miller and Finch, tangible proof that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. In the other, I felt not emptiness, but the distinct, thrilling warmth of possibility, of a future I could now shape entirely on my own terms. Julian was waiting for me, just outside the heavy, ornate wooden doors of the courthouse, as he had promised. He stood tall and reassuring, dressed neatly in a charcoal gray suit that somehow made him look both professional and approachable. A hopeful, gentle smile tugged at the corners of his lips, his eyes crinkling with a warmth that enveloped me. Without a word, he walked up to me, his gaze soft and full of an emotion I was only just beginning to understand. He gently, tenderly, brushed a stray strand of hair away from my face, his fingers lingering for a moment against my cheek. "You did it, Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet but resonant with a deep, unmistakable pride that made my heart swell. "You stood up for yourself, against unimaginable pressure. You faced them down, and you changed your life. I couldn't have done it alone," I whispered, my throat suddenly tight with a rush of unshed tears. Tears not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming gratitude and relief. "You were there every step of the way, Julian." He shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You were always strong, Eleanor. Incredibly strong. You just needed someone to see it, to believe in you. Like I do." He took a deep, deliberate breath, and for a moment, the bustling world around us, the distant city traffic, the murmur of reporters still lingering on the courthouse steps, the curious glances of passers-by, seemed to pause, to fade into an insignificant background hum. In that moment, standing there on the sun-drenched steps, there was only Julian and me, and the unspoken promise of a new beginning. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out not a small velvet box, as one might expect in a more conventional story, but a small, earth-stained linen pouch. My breath caught in my throat, a knot of unexpected emotion tightening my chest. "I know this isn't exactly fairy tale timing, or a traditional proposal," Julian said, his voice thick with a sincerity that resonated deep within my soul. "And life, as we both know all too well, isn't perfect. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes it's downright brutal. He paused, his gaze earnest and unwavering. But it's also real, Eleanor. And I would rather build something wonderfully, imperfectly real with you, something honest and true, than chase after any fleeting, unattainable illusion of perfection. He gently opened the small pouch, and instead of a glittering diamond, he revealed a handful of tiny, fragrant herb seedlings: rosemary, lavender, thyme. Their delicate green leaves, so full of life and promise, seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. He didn't drop to one knee. Instead, he simply held them out to me, a humble, heartfelt offering. "Eleanor Reynolds," he said, his voice soft but clear, imbued with a profound tenderness that made my heart ache in the best possible way. "Will you let me help you plant your garden? Will you build a life with me, a real life, starting today?" Tears, finally, unequivocally tears of joy, blurred my vision as 1,000 beautiful, overwhelming emotions rushed through me: profound relief, unadulterated happiness, a soaring, boundless hope, and a deep, abiding love for this kind, steadfast man who had seen the best in me when I could barely see it myself. The pain of the past, the long, dark shadows of Mom and Dad's cruelty, didn't magically disappear in that instant, but it no longer controlled me. It no longer defined me. I had survived it. I had faced it, fought it, and risen from its ashes, stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. And now, I was being offered not a fairy tale, but something far more precious: a future filled with genuine love, mutual respect, and the quiet joy of shared growth. "Yes," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Then, louder, clearer, surer than I had ever been about anything in my life: "Yes, Julian. 1,000 times, yes." A small, spontaneous cheer erupted from a few onlookers who had witnessed the quiet exchange, a smattering of applause breaking the afternoon stillness. Julian's smile widened, a radiant beam of pure happiness, as he carefully placed the pouch of seedlings into my open palm, his fingers briefly, warmly, enclosing mine. I pulled him into a tight, heartfelt embrace, laughing and crying at the same time, the scent of crushed herbs and new beginnings filling my senses. A few months later, after the legal dust had settled and a semblance of peace had returned to my life, Julian and I stood in the small backyard of my townhouse, our townhouse. We didn't have a grand, expensive wedding. Instead, we held a simple, intimate commitment ceremony, surrounded by a small group of people who genuinely cared for us, a few close friends, Julian's wonderfully supportive parents, and Scott Miller, who had become a trusted friend. There were no grand, empty spectacles, no toxic, suffocating expectations, just an abundance of honest love, heartfelt sincerity, and a quiet, unshakable hope for the future we would build together. After the ceremony, Julian and I moved fully into the townhouse, the same $480,000 home I had fought so fiercely, so desperately, to protect. It was no longer just my sanctuary, it was ours. Every wall, every room, every sun-drenched corner of that house, now filled with shared laughter and mutual respect, stood as a living testament to resilience, to courage, and to the enduring, transformative power of new beginnings. Together, we began to plant the herb garden I had always dreamed of. Julian, surprisingly skilled with his hands, built beautiful cedar planter boxes, and I, drawing on a long dormant interest in botany first sparked by a denied childhood wish for a science kit, researched companion planting and soil enrichment. The scent of rosemary, lavender, and thyme now perfumed the air. And as I knelt in the warm earth, my hands covered in soil, the sun on my face, a profound sense of peace settled over me. For the very first time in my life, I wasn't just living, wasn't just surviving. I was truly, deeply, joyfully alive.